Hi, and welcome to the fifth and final installment in our LinkedIn Live series, ISM World 2024, The People You'll Meet. My name is Dan Zeiger. I'm a senior writer and copy editor for Insight Supply Management. That's Institute for Supply Management's member publication. And we're excited to have you as a part of today's event, where we'll talk to one of the people you'll meet at the conference, which is April 29th through May 1st at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. The next 30 minutes will be an interactive experience, enabling you to learn more about the conference as well as get to know Rodrigo Alcantara. Feel free to ask questions throughout today's event, and we'll be sure to address them by the end of the broadcast if we have time. Before we get started, feel free to comment in the chat feature on where you're joining us from today, and if you've already registered for ISM World 2024, because you can make a virtual connection today with someone you might be able to later meet in person at the conference. Our guest is Rodrigo Alcantara. He's a procurement coordinator with Continent 8 Technologies. That's a global network solutions provider, and where he performs risk assessments to identify potential supply chain disruptions, and also develops mitigation strategies to ensure business continuity. He's got 15 years of supply management experience, both in the public and private sectors in the US and Mexico. And his session at ISM World 2024 is called Nearshoring, the Never Ending Consolidation of the Mexican Economy. You've probably heard it mentioned in the news a lot, and we talked about it in this space last week. Last year, for the first time in more than 20 years, Mexico surpassed China as the leading source of goods imported into the U.S. Reshoring or nearshoring manufacturing and or supply chain operations is a topic that heated up during the trade war and especially during the coronavirus pandemic, and it shows no sign of cooling off. Rodrigo's session will discuss, among other topics, how to conduct spend and risk analyses before embarking on a nearshoring effort, and what global issues and cultural considerations a company should consider. So it's my pleasure to chat on this with Rodrigo. Welcome. Let's bring him in.
Hello, everyone. Dan, it's a pleasure to be part of this LinkedIn Live, and thank you for the opportunity to provide a sneak peek of my presentation at ISM Conference 2024. And it's going to be, as you mentioned, on the benefits and risks of nearshoring in Mexico.
Yeah, can you just give us a glimpse into what attendees can expect on your session at ISM World 2024? I mean, as we talked about in our introduction, you know, nearshoring is a very hot topic right now.
Absolutely. Mm-hmm. During my presentation, I will address the geopolitical tensions that led to many organizations to relocate supply chains outside of China and are considering or in the process of nearshoring to Mexico. I will develop how the nearshoring phenomenon has raised great expectations on both sides of the border, how the media, consulting firms, political actors, and investors have expressed broad interest in the relocation of supply chains in Mexico, but also how, from the procurement perspective, this phenomenon requires a deep analysis of the risk and benefits that it might entail.
Yeah, you talked about some of the key benefits and risks right there. Just talk about that in general. Just what are some of the benefits and the risks that you're typically associated with when a company nearshores operations to Mexico?
Yeah, during the presentation of the different topics, I will refer to the benefits and risk of relocating supply chains to Mexico according to 5 different parts. Maybe they are interrelated, but I will address the following: cultural considerations, total cost of ownership, transportation and logistics, and economic and political landscape. Mm-hmm. And regarding the benefits, and a sneak peek about the benefits of the relocation of supply chains in Mexico is that we all know the strategic location that Mexico has with respect to the United States, with more than 2,500 miles of land border, but also how both countries have experienced a growing and uninterrupted commercial exchange during the last 30 years, thanks first to the to NAFTA, the free trade agreement that have Mexico, United States, and Canada. And since 2020, or the end of the negotiations in 2018, that is now called USMCA. Mm-hmm. It will be noted how this free trade agreement allowed Mexico and the United States to maintain this very sound commercial association, but also how the free trade agreement has provided them with the mechanism to solve disputes, either through consultations or panels, representing a viable option for investors on both sides of the borders. And it's something that many other countries have not in place with the United States, and makes Mexico like an appropriate place to move investments to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Could you elaborate, especially on the economic landscape of Mexico, just how it influences nearshoring decisions? Particularly, obviously, are the trade agreements and NAFTA and the US MCA are something that supply managers have to account for in their everyday operations in trade between Mexico, Canada, and the U.S. Just talk about those dynamics and how it might influence a company's nearshoring decision.
Yeah, indeed. A clear advantage when considering Mexico as a destination for nearshoring is its openness to international trade. At the moment, or currently, Mexico has 13 free trade agreements with over 50 countries, including United States, Canada, the European Union, 10 Latin American countries, Israel, and Japan. However, we need to be aware that although Mexico shows this openness to international trade, the Mexican economy is oriented towards trade with the United States. Both imports and exports are mainly with this partner. And the United States exports account for 83% and imports 41%. Something very important, and as you mentioned at the beginning, is how also countries like China started expanding investments in Mexico, but also how the Mexican imports of Chinese products increased in the past 30 years. In 1994, it was less than 1% of the total of the Mexican imports. And in 2023, it increased to 21%. So the main import partners for Mexico at the moment are the United States and China, accounting for 60% or a bit more of 60% of the total imports in the country. Then the main challenge for Mexico is to provide nearshoring efforts with a long-term vision and sound economic policies and industrial policies. However, the current economic landscape requires addressing a significant increase in fiscal deficit for 2024, water shortages, as well as an insufficient and poorly maintained infrastructure. In the past 5 years, and it's something that will be explained more in detail during the presentation, like the current administration has dedicated more of the budget to social programs, but not really in a way to bring people, to move people out of poverty lines. It's just like transferring money to people and not really trying to change those structures that have kept the population under poverty.
Yeah, could you expand on that a little bit? This is where I think your experience working in the public sector in Mexico, is pretty valuable. Obviously, to have a robust manufacturing or a sourcing destination, you have to have an educated populace. You have to have a workforce that is, ready to go and is competent. Just talk about how, the economic, foundations, are they being laid there at a reasonable pace that a company, were it to, nearshore operations in Mexico, it can feel generally confident that it's going to get, what it needs from the working population there?
Yeah, I think that the working population is ready. Mexico at the moment still has a demographic bonus, and we can say that at least for the next 3 or 4 decades, there will not be any problem around offering the necessary or covering the labor demand by the by manufacturing organizations in Mexico. However, one of the main problems, and when talking about the fiscal deficit that the Mexican government has experienced, and is not something new. Mexico has had a very small number of taxpayers since ever. So that's one of the main problems when we are talking about expanding infrastructure or increasing the budget dedicated to education or developing other areas of the market. But as you mentioned, the population is ready to that. Many public universities have worked with the private sector in different areas of the country to start training people to cover that demand of jobs.
Yeah, when we talk about a workforce population, obviously one of the biggest dynamics that's going to factor into there is labor costs. And if you've done research, that's one of the things that made Mexico most attractive in comparison to China, was that the labor costs were more reasonable for a company. But just how, in recent, as Mexico has become, more popular as a potential nearshoring or reshoring destination, have the labor costs ticked up as that gap with China closed a little bit? Just talk about that dynamic.
Yeah, I think that it's a reason, also the labor cost. However, I will also address about the fiscal incentives that the Mexican government provides to manufacturers that are export oriented. But as you mentioned, also labor costs are really a main variable in this equation for nearshoring. And just when comparing the average salary per year in Mexico, for example, in 2023, the average salary, it was like $4,100 per year. However, when we are talking about workers and technicians in the manufacturing industry, it goes to $10,400 per year. And when we talk about administrative staff, it goes to $21,000 per year, while in China, the manufacturing average salary is $13,000. So we can see this gap between the administrative staff in Mexico and workers and technicians, that is almost the double for administrative staff, but still is something that makes Mexico an attractive option for nearshoring.
Yeah, one of the themes that we've talked about at ISM, since the nearshoring and the reshoring discussion really started to heat up, at the beginning of the trade war, and then especially during the pandemic, is one of the themes that comes up is moving from China, moving your manufacturing or supply chain operations from China. That's very easily talked about. It's not so easily done because there are many long-time ingrained supply chain advantages that China has that you just can't easily replicate in a Vietnam or a Malaysia or an Indonesia or, wherever alternative that you look for. And I know that applies to Mexico as well. And, one of some of the, dynamics that you may deal with, or a company you may deal with, if you've read some of the news lately, that even if you're sourcing from Mexico, you may be sourcing from a manufacturing facility that is owned by China in Mexico. Just talk about maybe not necessarily that particular aspect of it. You can if you want, but just in general, what are some of the challenges, that make it, not easy said as it is done, in reshoring from China or moving operations from China to Mexico?
Sure. And it's necessary, as you mentioned, to keep in mind that China's supply chain advantages, and to be aware that Mexico's manufacturing value added is very far from the one attained by China. At the moment, China attains 1/3 of the manufacturing value added in the world, and Mexico has, and that accounts for almost $5 trillion, and Mexico has less than 0.1 trillion at the moment. So when we think that, okay, if we start just like bringing investments into Mexico, immediately we'll realize about the results or having an impact immediately in the industry. I think that we are daydreaming in that case. I think Mexico needs like a long-term industrial policy, and also with the United States. I think that both countries have been late into modernizing their infrastructure, and especially like those points of entry of the merchandises going from Mexico to the United States. In a recent report from the Mexican Customs Agency, they mentioned that 60% of the trade is based in just 3 points of entry. If I will remember, it was Laredo, Tijuana, and Ciudad Juarez. So they are not fully, not just understanding the benefits of diversifying those points of entry, but also to diversify, they need to invest in infrastructure. I remember last week that the speaker that will be also talking about nearshoring was commenting about those like 12 lanes highways in China, while in Mexico we are being not just impacted by the lack of security in many of the main highways, but we are talking sometimes about 4-lane highways. So it's something that needs to be kept in mind, because we are not, or at least in Mexico, adding so much value to the products. Mexico at some point opted just for having like, sorry if someone feels like insulted by this or not very comfortable with the concept, but just in creating an assembling manufacturing industry. And sorry, Dan.
I was just saying, that was Rosemary Coates that Rodrigo was referring
to. Rosemary,
the speaker. And you can go back and watch that, on our LinkedIn or YouTube page. I'll explain that a little bit more at the end. We talked about some of the things that many companies may miss or underestimate, and it reminded me of a article that you wrote for Inside Supply Management magazine. We have a department that's called Perspectives, where basically a supply management professional just can share their thoughts on a particular issue that is hot at the time. You spoke about some of the differences between working in the public sector and the private sector, but we also have general questions. What's the biggest supply management challenge that you've had to overcome, or what are supply chain concerns that keep you up at night? And your answer to the biggest professional challenge that you've ever had to overcome, I thought was really relevant to the discussion we're having right now. This is in our November-December 2022 issue that Rodrigo contributed to us. And when answering the biggest professional challenge, this is what he wrote. A significant and recurring challenge that I faced in the public sector related to advising internal areas about assessing their needs while eliminating risks by identifying suppliers with the capacity to meet buyers' needs and eliminating misleading information from the decision-making process. And I thought that was really relevant to what we're talking about now. Just how does that relate, when you're talking about nearshoring or reshoring to Mexico? I mean, what should you be looking for in potential suppliers, and what bad information is out there that could negatively impact a company's decision-making?
No, thank you, Dan, for bringing back that article. I really enjoy being part of that project. And for sure, when identifying suppliers with the capacity to meet the different organizations' needs in Mexico, I think that procurement areas must perform an analysis of the capabilities of those potential suppliers, and especially that they are taking full advantage of the benefits of operating in Mexico. Because sometimes that bad information or misleading information is that, okay, it's just because we are closer. The benefits are just are there. Well, but is that a supplier using the appropriate third-party logistic and transportation suppliers? Are they really complying with the free trade agreement stipulations? Or in case for those that are participating as part of the IMEX program, that is let's say a duty deferral program that the Mexican government introduced in 2006 and allows manufacturers dedicated to exports to introduce into temporary goods to Mexico, not paying or waiving them from all different taxes or tariffs. So this is a great advantage for those organizations looking to nearshore in Mexico, but they also need to use the necessary services so that they accomplish or they abide with those programs. At least the IMEX program immediately, if they follow all the rules, at least they will save all the value-added tax, that is 16% in Mexico. And not to mention the different tariffs that are also waived in that program that might bring the savings not just from 16%, but up to 25%. So this is, for me, something very important for the procurement teams to address, and also for the legal departments accompanying procurement in this risk assessment. Because otherwise, if they are just turning into Mexico because they are closer to us, they are not going to obtain any advantage. I think that the in-depth analysis requires to look at more and more variables. Also, although it's an unfortunate and very sad topic for the country, but there are still many problems around security. I remember last October, November, that ISM was reporting about the number or the average of transport assaults in Mexico, and in comparison to the United States, and it's really a high risk in Mexico. And although the Mexican government has dedicated large amounts of money to security issues, it hasn't improved at all.
And the time that we got left, I do want to ask you just in general, what you're looking most forward to at the ISM World Conference. But before we wrap up the particular discussion on nearshoring, is there anything that I haven't talked about, anything that we haven't discussed, or maybe something, a company that you're consulting with that, some of the concerns that they have that they bring up with you that, we haven't discussed that you think might be important to add?
Well, thank you for that. And
Yeah.
I think as part of my current job, or just my also my personal professional interest, is around Mexico. Like, okay, why in the industry that I'm working at the moment, we don't find so many Mexican suppliers, or at least suppliers based in Mexico? And the majority, although of course working for an IT dedicated company, the majority of suppliers are based either in Asia or in Europe at the moment. However, that brought my attention into why is important nearshoring, why the Mexican government has not acted or didn't act promptly in order to attract more investments into Mexico. At the moment, or at the end of 2023, foreign direct investment in Mexico just reached the levels that it had previous to the pandemic. So there are many announcements about investments in Mexico. Last year, Tesla announced that they are building a huge plant in Monterrey, but at the moment they haven't started. So those announcements are great. They are raising so many good expectations, not just from especially for politicians at the moment. They are so happy to talk about that and saying that they brought those investments. But at the moment, those announcements are not creating jobs. And as I mentioned, and this is more a problem for the Mexican government, if they keep like basing the manufacturing activity on that IMEX program, that is a duty deferral process or mechanism, the Mexican government is not solving its fiscal problems. They are not obtaining any tax from that. Has been more like a way to create employment, which is great. At the moment on the IMEX program, there are almost 3 million Mexicans employed in manufacturing, but the economically active population in Mexico is 60 million. So how can we bring the other part of the non-export oriented manufacture industry from Mexico to the export oriented?
Well, hey, in the minute or so that we got left, I know this is going to be your first conference, ISM World Conference. What made this participating in this conference attractive to you? And what are your expectations about engaging with other supply chain professionals and thought leaders at the conference?
Well, it will be a great opportunity. I'm so excited. Also, I will meet so many chapter members, I'm sure, from South Florida and now from Arizona, where I relocated last year. And also, I think the opportunity, not just for networking, but also the idea of hearing about the trends that are impacting our profession and how other procurement professionals are facing those challenges. It will be a great opportunity. Also, just looking at the list of speakers, starting with Jan Bremer, and why not to say with Chef Jose Andres. It will be a pleasure to listen to them during the presentation.
Well, we're looking forward to seeing you there. And I know it'll be a really fun and insightful time, and we're looking forward to your session. So thanks for joining us today to talk about it a little bit. Thanks. Rodrigo Alcantara is a procurement coordinator with Continent 8 Technologies, and his session is Nearshoring, the Never Ending Consolidation of the Mexican Economy. So thanks to him for joining us, and a huge thank you for joining us. As we mentioned, this is the last night of our tour, but you can catch our performances, on ISM's LinkedIn page and our YouTube page, the LinkedIn Live sessions previewing the conference. We hope you found some great takeaways and that you'll join us at ISM World 2024 at the MGM Grand in Las Vegas. If you've already registered, we'll look forward to seeing you. And if you haven't, you can do so and get more information by visiting ismworld.org/annual. So for Rodrigo Alcantara and Robin Garrison, who helped us behind the scenes, I'm Dan Zeiger. Thanks for joining us. And our next stop is Las Vegas. We'll see you there.